So I am going to introduce our guest for this evening, who's Christian K. Lee, and he uses his camera as a tool for understanding. His current work explores the complicated relationship between the Second Amendment and African Americans. And tonight he'll give us insight into the history, the laws, and personal stories that provide a background to this work. And so now I'm going to turn it over to you, Christian.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I think the best way for me to go ahead and talk about my work is to kind of like send us on a glide path of how I began working on the work that I'm creating today. And if I'm going to do that, I have to start with the Ferguson unrest, where I was a college student about 10 years ago, pursuing my undergraduate degree in journalism. And the unarmed shooting death of Michael Brown took place. And I think this is one of the first times that I was inspired. I was already doing creating images before this, but this is one of the first time that I felt like my camera could really be a tool for good and a tool for change in my local community. And it empowered me in ways that I feel like I wasn't being empowered otherwise. Like I felt like I could show a true raw emotion of, you know, what's going on in my local neighborhood, because again, this was my local neighborhood. I was going to college in this neighborhood. I'm from Chicago, but my school was about 4 hours away and near Ferguson, Missouri. And um I was deeply saddened. Again, we talk about my work that I'm creating today, with armed doesn't mean dangerous. I would say this was the genesis of it. You know, images like this in the media of Black people being killed, or the relationship of African Americans with the guns. This is, kind of what I was seeing in the media. And this is what inspired me to, I think, again, this is a good genesis. I don't think it exactly starts here, because there were other shooting deaths, but this is one of the first shooting deaths that sparked international attention within my years. I mean, before this, you had the Rodney King riots, you right? Um, but this is one of the first times within my generation where people of my age group felt like they could go out and inspire change. Um, for some reason, my computer won't go to the next. So from there, okay, there we are. So again, like this is like one of the first times that I felt like I could go out and I can inspire change without permission. I think a lot of times creators are often, you know, they may have an idea or want to go do something, but they might not have the budget to do it, and they're stopped. I think this is one of the first times I had my own camera. I didn't care about a budget. I didn't care if somebody was going to publish it. I went out and created the work on my own. So, taking us on a glide path of how I transitioned into what I'm making now, I started becoming more interested in portraiture. You know, um, a long time ago, I had bought like a film camera and I never used it. And um, I had got into some, I got really interested in like financial literacy. So like one day I woke up and felt like I had too much stuff that was not helping me financially in my life. So literally I sold everything, like clothes, shoes, camera gear. The only thing that I did not sell was a Pentax 6.7 camera. And and a lot of times people ask me to do photography for them or for a client, and I would say no because I felt like I didn't have a camera. But I didn't really feel again, through this timeline, I had worked on several other projects. I had worked on several other projects, but I don't think I really took anything seriously again until, Council Prom, COVID. Um, Council Prom, COVID, and I looked up and I'm like, man, what's going on in our community is like very important. And I feel inspired to document this. And I was like, you know what? I keep saying I don't have a camera, but I have a great functioning camera in my backyard, which is my Pentax. I mean, in my closet, which is my Pentax 6.7. So I picked it up, dusted it off, and I went in my community and started making images. And again, with my Ferguson project, I'm always interested in what mainstream media is missing. So we see how mainstream media was focusing a lot on how stores were being bought out, deaths. And I'm looking around, and my little cousin, I'm the family photographer, and my cousin wasn't going to get the opportunity to go to prom. And I was like, dang, if I was there with her in California or Chicago, um, I would be the one taking her photos. But I can't right now because I'm here in Texas. So there's other people right here in my neighborhood that need that exact thing that I would have did for my cousin. Um, and that's what inspired me to go out and make this series. And I would say this is like one of the first projects that really like, again, like I really saw the power of the camera because I met this family and they gifted me with Jamil Shabazz's book and some of his work that he did, and I was able to learn about his work. But um, this is like one of the first times that I was able, outside of Ferguson, I was able to tackle subjects in the way that I saw fit without outside objections or waiting for somebody to critique me to get it published. You know, this is like one of the first times that I was really saying that I'm gonna do it my way. Like this family, I remember they asked me once, like, well, where's it gonna be published? And I remember this was like one of the first times that I felt very empowered to say, you know what? Usually I care a lot about that, but this is all about you. And right now, I want to focus on your story right now. And then after I create this work, I'll worry about that. So, and I was looking at paintings. I was looking at paintings of what painters did and how, and I think this style of imagery, like very still, not overly posed imagery. If you see a lot of my images that I've been making recently, portraits, they're not overly posed. It's like people are just still in their moments with slight gestures. And I feel like um, the reason why I started doing that is because I started researching older paintings of royal people, and I was seeing how I wanted to see how they were depicted. I wanted to see how they were depicted, and I wanted to use that same approach to my photography today. And um, and I think that carries over. They kind of have the same pose. I think this is Queen Elizabeth. Don't misquote me, but I may be wrong, so don't misquote me. But if you look at the gestures of her hands, I tried to mimic that in my imagery. I was looking for those um, quiet moments that were not overly posed. I felt like it's something about this style of photography that I feel like allows a person's true soul to come out through the imagery in ways that posing would miss, um, overly posing would miss. Um, One of the final images that I want to show in this series is this image. Because when I went to go meet this family, she told me that I could tell that the the girl was what some people would consider like um, a tomboy, and but her parents really wanted, well, specifically her mother and her grandmother specifically wanted her to dress in a dress, and I did not want to take the photo. She wanted to wear a suit, And I felt like she felt like that properly depicted her. Um, and I completely forgot about it. I think I went out of town on vacation, and I had put it back in my mind that if this young lady does not have a suit on when I come here, I'm not taking this image. Um, and I went on vacation and I put it off in the back of my mind because they never followed up with me. And I get a call one day like, "Hey, we're all outside. We're ready to shoot." And I'm like, "Whoa." And like, so I hurried up, started packing up my gear, loaded my film. And I'm thinking on the way driving, I'm calling my friends like, "Man, I said I was not taking this photo. I said I was not taking this photo." But I got here and I saw her. And no matter, even though her family like put her in his dress, you could tell the way her hair is cut, you know, her posture. You could tell that um I don't want to overspeak on what she identified as, but you could tell that the true spirit of her shined through this dress, in my opinion. Like I could tell that, you know, one, she doesn't really want to wear it. The rest of her family looks happy. She's not smiling, you know. Um, and then again, I think this is one of those images that really show me the true power of photography. That no matter how hard you want to hide something or pose it, you know, a person's true spirit will like shine through. And again, this was going to be one of the images that I wasn't going to use in the series, but eventually I did because I felt her spirit did shine through that dress eventually. So I think this is the final image in the series. Take a drink of water. So now this brings me to my latest series, Armed Doesn't Mean Dangerous, which I've been working on for over a year now, and I plan to continue it. I'm currently based here in Austin, Texas, but I'm getting ready to move to Chicago to pursue my MFA. And I think it's just a perfect place to tell the other side of the story, which we'll get there. And if there's questions at the end, we could do that. But um, before we hop into this, I just want to say that the goal with this is not to promote guns. I know a lot of times when people see this body of work, it comes across like, "Chris, are you trying to convince me to start to buy a gun?" And what I tell people a lot of times is the answer to that is no. What I want to do is through the Second Amendment, through the Second Amendment, I'm actually trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to examine the Second Amendment and explore some of the hypocrisies within it. It like for and explore some of the hypocrisies in it within it. You know, one of what a lot of people would consider to be, from the outside looking in, one of America's highest values or more values, which is, you know, the ability to self-protect yourself, or the Second Amendment. When you look at this country as a whole, there's a lot of people today, you know, fighting for their Second Amendment rights. And what I wish to do is one of the most visible things that people say that they are passionate about. I want to examine that and explore how African Americans have had injustices in these countries, how minorities have had injustices in these countries. And I mean minorities of all backgrounds, not just Black, white, but woman, LGBTQ community, you know, how this most visible right, how there's still injustices in this, and how this is woven into the fabric of many other um, institutions and policies in America. Whew, now that I gave that long spiel, we could go into the body of work now. So before we get in, I do want to dedicate this body of work to my father, who was a police officer in Chicago. Take a drink of water. Who was a police officer in Chicago, and he passed right before I joined the army, almost about 4 years ago. And I would say that this man truly, you know, taught me a lot about what it means to protect yourself, to protect your family. And I think through him, I was, it really impacts my artist practice today because through my father, I was able to see, it gave me a interesting outlook on life. On one case, I lived in a household where my father was a police officer every day, but I grew up in the hood, what most people would consider the hood, inner city Chicago, in the Inglewood community. So like I would go on the street and I could also identify what it meant to be a citizen in communities like the Inglewood community of Chicago, you know. So I always feel like I had this interesting perspective on topics where I could look at both sides. I could look at both sides. And um, that's what I want to share with my father. So thanks, Pops. So I think if we're going to start talking about the injustices in the Second Amendment, I think one of the real first thing we do, we have to look at the Mulford Act of 1967. And this was a law that came into play to pretty much prevent the Black Panthers from exercising their Second Amendment rights. Now, this is very interesting to talk about because if you look at the NRA today, the, um, or any policy group, you know, people are fighting for the Second Amendment. You know, people are fighting for the Second Amendment and the right to be able to open carry and the right to their Second Amendments. But you see, at this time when the Black Panthers were doing it, you see that laws came into play, which were supported um, by police unions, by the NRA, by local politicians. It seems like that when it's time for African Americans to protect themselves, you know, there's a fear. Like, again, I always kind of look in this image and you can see where this guy, he's like totally shocked that these guys have the audacity to like open carry. And, but there's people doing it today just so openly. And I think it's interesting. And to create a juxtaposition of where they stand, I don't know, most of you guys remember the Bundy trials, where there was a Nevada rancher. They were literally open carrying, having rifles aimed at citizens, aimed at law enforcement. And you would see that these people were largely praised in media in certain instances. You know, I mean, the truth of it, what if this was the Black Panthers aiming their rifles at citizens, at police officers? I think that there would have been a total different um, um, approach. I mean, they did have their hiccups with the law, but you see that the police officers were far more patient, far more patient with this group of people than they were with the Black Panthers. And like, as an African American man, I think this is largely due to race, you know? So I was inspired by, this is like one of the first times that I really kind of like did a lot of research outside of just looking at images and going off of how I was feeling. One of the first books that I came across was This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed by Charles E. Cobb. This man goes back into history and gives firsthand accounts of how guns made the civil rights movement possible. You know, a lot of people, when they think about the civil rights movement, they think about it as being very peaceful, a very peaceful movement. But you'll see that in some of his writings, he talks about how Martin Luther King, he talks about how Martin Luther King had guns. But Martin Luther King knew that as a Black man in front of media, in front of the cameras, I have to appear as very peacefully. I have to be spat on and not fight back. I have to have dogs attack on me and not hit back in order to be respected by large stream America. Um, which is interesting, but we'll talk about that later. Another book that influenced my a lot of my practice. Also, I do want to say disclosure, you know, I use these books as research for my own self, but you know, I'm always kind of curious as to where these authors' values may stand with mine, or you know, um, if they would agree with what I'm talking about or not. But to me, that's kind of not the point because everybody is entitled to their own view. I can credit these books, however, for the research that I learned, the historical fact. Now, whatever conclusions are drawn from that, you know, that's on a person by person cases, but basis. But one of the real things that I love what Carol Anderson did in the second, she really went back into history from almost the beginning of this country, and she examined key laws, key policies, key moments in history where African Americans actually used the gun to guarantee their rights, or the guns were used against African Americans. And that's led me to calling my project, you know, the complicated relationship between African Americans and the Second Amendment. I a lot of times refer to it as that. So, yeah, thinking about the Mulford Act and thinking about these policies that came into play, I was thinking about all the images that I was seeing. You know, like I always saw like the drug dealers on TV. I saw the Mike Browns of Chicago being killed with the gun. But why is it that I never saw African Americans using a gun to protect themselves peacefully, like I saw people of other backgrounds do? We see the cowboys of other backgrounds. We see the hunters, you know, of other backgrounds. We see the sports shooters. Why was I not seeing these images of African Americans? Now, and I don't think I started off as like, I didn't start up, like I started this with the idea of just wanting to address that just playing out just like that. Why do I not see this? I think this is very interesting. I think this is something that we should talk about. And I went out and I started to look for those images that I was not seeing. Why is it that I never seen a black person, a black guy in a suit holding a gun? This is images that I never saw until like I started creating them. And a lot of people that I was photographing, these were images that they weren't seeing until I started photographing them. And again, you see that I'm using the same style that I did in my last project, where I'm not overly posing people um, to create a portrait. I want to catch them. I mean, clearly it's a posed portrait, but I don't want to overly pose them to the point that, you know, you know, I I just believe that there was something about seeing a group of people who were not positively depicted in media or depicted in a positive way, and I wanted to depict these people in a positive way. And I looked at, again, like I said, I looked at paintings, and I wanted to use that same style to kind of like uplift this community that I felt like only was talked about in a negative in a negative sense. So, take some water. I think if we're really going to talk about how we got to where we got to, one of the laws that we have to talk about is policies that we have to talk about is the Uniform Militia Act of 1792, which was a policy that pretty much stated, now this is loosely off my memorization, but this is very accurate. Pretty much it says that all white males between the ages of 18 and 40 were mandated by law to go out and buy a gun. And, you know, you look at laws that it's a lot of laws on the book that was like this. I'm just pointing out one. You look at the culture that we see in America where you don't see LGBT, you don't see same-sex couples owning, you don't see people of different racial minority groups, you don't see women with guns. They're in the minority. And I think most of that was due to the fact of the Uniform Militia Act, which later transformed into what we have now considered to be the National Guard. But the Uniform Militia Act is pretty much our first time, and I'll dig into this a little bit deeper. This is our first time of where states were forming militias. And we'll talk about why they were doing that later. But right now, I want to talk about is how this discriminated against racial minority group. Who is this saying that could fight for America and who couldn't? This excluded women, this excluded all minority groups. And we see today women are just now in recent years getting their ability to join the military or have the same rights in the military. This outlook was policy on the book from laws like this. Again, so I started thinking about what are the images I'm not seeing. I wasn't seeing same-sex couples with guns. I wasn't seeing Black couples in a positive way depicted. You might hear of a domestic violence. You might hear of a domestic violence incident and call involving a minority group, but never somebody that was just like, hey, I'm a law-abiding citizen and I want to protect my home. To me, it was very interesting. And I want to set out to talk about that. Another thing that we weren't seeing was women being able to protect themselves against all people, like Lita, who recently is a single mother and recently went through a domestic violence incident, and she was using her firearm as a way to protect herself. One of her quotes is, "I'll never allow," loosely translated, but quoted, but I'll never allow to be that scared of somebody again. And this is how she was using her gun to protect herself. Okay. And this brings me to another topic. These are just all things that were kind of like influencing the images that I was making. As a child, I always thought about, if it's something that I want to get across, if I wanted to fight for something as a Black man, what approach would I take? And I think a lot of Black people at some point in their life, or even minorities, think about this. Do I want to take a Malcolm X approach, or do I want to take the Martin Luther King approach? Do I want to take the Martin Luther King approach, or do I want to take the Black Panthers approach? And you'll see that in mainstream media, that a lot of times it's like Black people are encouraged to take the Martin Luther King approach, that we have to be spit on, we have to be beat, we have to have shakes thrown us while during sit-ins in order to have our voices heard. We have to have dogs attack us, police beat us, and still not keep our composure, and not hit back. And you will see today that we have a complete different, I think mainly in today's society, you have a different youth, with the Black Lives Matter movement, per se. A lot of times in media, people often, criticize them for the approaches they take. I'm not gonna necessarily take a stance or right or wrong, but I would say that their techniques and their tactics yield results. And I just think that a lot of you don't really want to take the Martin Luther King approach, the Martin Luther King approach, where we're going to go in here and we're going to sit in and we're going to let you throw shakes on us. We're going to let you spit on us. We're going to let you beat on us. And we're not going to do anything to protect ourselves. What is that an American concept? Is that an American concept to like be beat on without an ability to be able to protect yourselves? So why do we promote that? Why are leaders like the Black Panthers rarely talked about? It's like people try to steer people away from the Black Panthers, but try to steer them more to like Martin Luther King. What's so wrong with saying what Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or Marcus Garvey, we're saying we're going to be self-efficient. If we are a peaceful people, but if you try to harm us or try to hurt us or be violent to us, we will meet that violence with violence. And I think that's very fair. I don't know a lot of people that will, yeah. Anyway, so moving forward. So by examining that, I just constantly kept thinking about, okay, examining that type of mindset, how does that necessarily get us to where we get up now? Are their parents teaching their kids to protect themselves? I never saw that image. I never saw Black people openly teaching their children how to defend themselves. Here in Texas, I do. I see people learning how to protect themselves at a very young age. And I was photographing a couple one day, and they told me that they were scared. They were sending their 15-year-old Black daughter to school, and they saw that the other kids in their community, they were going out to the hunting ranges, they were going out to gun ranges, but their Black child, they felt like their Black child had an unbalance of power. If their Black child was ever at their house and they had to fight their children, they were scared that their children would be at a disadvantage in the ability to protect themselves. And you'll see that a lot of people feel this way when you look into large stream America and you see people marching in public with guns. What is that necessarily like telling people? Again, you see, I don't really talk a lot about the images because I'm very like research based, and I feel like if it's technical questions, we can ask those questions, but it's more important for me to like go over the history. Now, in order to like sum all of this up and bring this to like an end, we have to talk about when the Second Amendment was formed and what was going on. And let me take a drink of water for this. We have to talk about the Second Amendment and when it was formed. And at the time the Second Amendment was formed, the states were trying to unify. And slaves existed at the time that the Second Amendment was formed. So nobody could tell me that women didn't have rights when the Second Amendment was formed. LGBTQ, people from the LGBT community did not have rights. The only people that were empowered in America really were white males, roughly between the ages of 18 and 40, so you cannot tell me that the Second Amendment does not have racist roots, because if you look at it and when it was founded around the time where slaves were revolting, some of the most biggest slave revolts in this world. And a lot of states in the South, their economy was based on slavery. And they wanted the ability to be able to crush slave revolts. That's why you see that the militias were founded. So if you look around a lot of racist people that people would consider racist, they're involved in like these militias because they know the true history. Now, I think some people really want to protect the country. I believe in that. But there are some that's trickled in there that really understand the true racist history behind the Second Amendment and militias. Because around this time, again, slaves were revolting. Um, and the South wanted the ability, actually, more specifically, individual states wanted the ability to protect their economy. They did not trust nearby states, or they did not trust the federal government. That's why you see a lot of people, a lot of states today are really big on state rights. This is rooted in the Second Amendment and the unifying of the states, the state rights. The states did not trust other states or the federal government to come and protect their economy. They wanted the ability to be able to do it at the state level. And the only way to protect their economy on a state level, when local community members could not do so, was militias. So the Second Amendment is deeply rooted in an imbalance in power in this country, racism, and yeah. So this, I mean, and this is how we get to where we are right now, where you see why there's a large group of people in this country that do not identify with the Second Amendment, mostly people of minority backgrounds, women. But you'll see that that is starting to change, because I think people are starting to see that there is an unbalance of power. When you see people showing up to our protests with guns and we cannot march freely, I think you see largely that things are changing. And that's what motivated me to begin working on this project. And this concludes my talk. So I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks, Christian.
Yeah.
No, that was great. History and law and personal stories. You wrapped it all up together in that talk, which is great to hear, like, where your interest came from, both personally and like in the bigger picture with the history of this country and the laws. That's really, and the research that you're doing too. It's always interesting to hear what kind of research people are doing to inform their projects. So
yeah, I will say, yeah, history and research have really formed. And like I tell people, like my undergraduate degree is journalism. So, but I do consider myself to be an artist, but I think that I can't get away from it, because if you really want to get to the root of what's going on in our society, you have to look at history. You have to see how we got here. So it deeply informs my practice.
yeah, and there's like a lack of that historical knowledge too, and that kind of feeds into people's misunderstandings and even people's like deep-rooted racist beliefs, and they don't know the history in their country or in their state, their town. They don't understand what other groups have experienced. They have no empathy. They don't understand because they don't have that foundation in history. They don't know why, like you were talking about how we got to where we are today, and a lot of people don't have that kind of knowledge because of that lack of historical background.
Yeah, like yeah, and I think when I'm having these talks, like, because of that exact reason, I spent a lot less time talking about my individual images and more time bringing over the parts that may be missing just by viewing the image. Yeah, I think when somebody look at my work, they see a mirror. Their personal experiences are reflected at them. But when we sit down and have a conversation, I find that a lot of times people don't necessarily agree with me at the end of it. And I'm not looking for agreement. I'm looking for understanding. And if we move the needle from no understanding to a little understanding, like, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, and it's just an opportunity to share the knowledge that you've gained through your research too.
Mhm.
You know, like people may not have heard of the various acts that you're talking about, you know, in your talk, or like periods of history. Um, but through your research, you've found out information that you can share with people then, and then you're educating them.
Right.
So I think that's, you know, every time you talk about the work, you have that opportunity, which is great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, does anybody have any questions for Christian? You could put them in the chat, or there's a raise hand function that you can enable. And if you do that, you can turn your mic on. So if anybody has any questions, now is the time. And while we're waiting to see if anyone, oh, Lindsay has a question. Let's see. All right. Do you think that the Second Amendment will ever be implemented inclusively?
I think what you're asking me is, do I think that the Second Amendment will ever be an inclusive law? Something that all people will be able to see the true benefit from, like
Mm.
like other people are seeing. And the truth is, I think we are moving closer to that. That's why I feel like, even though it may be for a negative reason, that a lot of people are coming to gun ownership in fear that um, the people that necessarily have put them down in society are going to try to return them to that, or that they may not,
Mm.
be granted to all the rights that every citizen is granted to. And I think because of that, a lot of people are saying, hey, I don't care if this is inclusive or not. We're going to really test the system on this. You know, we're going to test the system. Y'all say that I got the Second Amendment right. So let's go ahead and put it out there and see that if I go to court, will I get the same justice as a white person or a white male would
Mm.
get? You know, will the jury see me in the same law? I feel like the trajectory of what's going on in our country, a lot of people are more willing to test the theory of that law. Um, to test the theory of that law if we truly have the same rights as others. And I think that's what we're moving to.
Great. Thanks for the question, Lindsay. Um, if you have anything to follow up, you could put it in the chat. Or if there are any other questions, you can put them in the chat as well. Or like I said, you could raise your hand and you could turn on your mic and video. But yeah, I think when we were talking the other day, we were talking about kind of like an increase, maybe not an increase, but I've seen an increase, just what I've seen out there appears to be an increase of like specifically like LGBTQ gun owner groups, African American gun owner groups. I mean, some of them have been around historically for quite a while, but I just found that to be kind of interesting. That like it goes back to what you were just saying, Christian, about people like kind of testing the Second Amendment to see how inclusive it actually is. So I
Yeah.
think that that's interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think we are. And I don't think we've seen the results from that testing yet. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think we see that people are getting them, but we're not seeing in large scale media it actually being tested. And I've been doing a lot of interviews where I've been interviewing some people. And I remember I interviewed Brandon, one of the gentlemen that I showed. He had his firearm with a suit on. And
Mm.
in his quote, he says that, when I put on my gun, if I ever have to use it, I don't know if I went to court that
Mm.
I'll get the same justice as a white male, as a white person would get. But what's going on in this country, I feel like I have to test it. Like
Mm.
every time that a black gun owner puts on that gun, we're being tested twice.
Mm.
One, just to protect ourselves individually, and two, we're being tested in a court of law because, Lord willing, if it's a white person that is shot in the efforts of us defending ourselves in an all-white jury, would
Mm,
the odds be in our favor? Maybe in a major city, Chicago, but what about in back rural communities, small towns where they don't have a diverse neighborhood, where the Black minority population is like 2 to 3%? Would that
mm,
person in the jury of their peers truly get justice? I don't know. I think we haven't seen that tested yet a lot. I think we're going to see that tested in the years to come. So I think that's a good question. That's a question to ask, and that's the question. That's the other side of this history that's yet to come.
mm. That that makes me think of how much might be happening that we're not seeing, and that makes me think of Ahmaud Arbery, how that
Mm,
got buried until the video came to light. So it just makes me think of, what might be going on in some small towns or wherever that's kind of flying under the radar.
yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. And these are one of those cases with the video cases where we get footage. But a lot of times, Black people already knew this. I always say that every time like a new article come out or like a new video come out, it's like a palm slap. It's like, bro, I could have told you this. I could have told you this 15, 20 years ago. This stuff that in our communities is like passed down, but it's just like the world is just now seeing it. And
Mm,
it's like they're not having to take like our word for it, you know.
mm,
I mean, for every Ahmaud Arbery case, there's a lot of other rural neighborhoods that this exact thing is happening.
right.
This exact thing is happening. So, whenever I see a Ahmaud Arbery case, I'm not shocked at all. Like, I know it really encourages like worldwide like protest or like response to it, but I think a lot of like minorities um are kind of like, I mean, bro, I could have told you that. I mean, look at the Rodney King case.
Right.
I mean, this has been going on for years. And I think Rodney King was one of the first times that we were able to see it on tape.
Right.
But now everybody got the camera in their hands. And that's the true power of like photography. That's the true power of photography. And that's the true power of like, even kind of like what I want to do is that I kind of want to show you and put it in our face. Like, look, this exists. Look, this exists. Like, we have to talk about this. And yeah, I think photography kind of like put it in people's face in a way that we are forced to confront it, and
Right.
forced to make us uncomfortable, and especially in the art space, because I think a lot of times we go to museums to like enjoy our day, like to feel good, to see something that's appeasing to our eyes. So when you stumble across something like my work that makes you uneasy, it could be very easy to like rebel or like put it off. But you might not think it about that day, but when you go home,
Mm.
you're gonna think about why you are uneasy. And then maybe we could start to have a conversation.
Well, and that's a huge role of the arts too, is like to challenge people to think. So yeah, I don't think people should, I don't know, be frightened or intimidated, if they see work like yours in a gallery or museum setting. I mean, the artist's role, like one of the most important roles for the artists, is to challenge people to
Mm.
think, just to challenge them. So um, anyway,
Yeah.
we have another question. Considering the major contrast of gun laws in Texas and Chicago, how do you think your move to Chicago will contribute to your body of work?
Um, Mainly because I mean there definitely have polar views on what guns can do for a community. You know,
Mm,
you see Texas has some of the most open gun laws in the world. in the world, and largely you'll see that they don't necessarily have, I mean, and you compare that to a place like Chicago, where you see they have some of the most restrictive gun laws in the world. And my grandmother used to always say, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding. Let's compare these. Let's compare these places. Let's look at how Black people are largely depicted in both of these places. That's why I feel like I'm fit to really truly talk about this topic. Because let's look at how minority groups, I'm not going to even throw them out. I'm going to let you use your own general imagination, you know, because if I say it, it's like it's biased. Let's look at the gun laws in these two different states. Let's look at largely in media how Black people are viewed. Let's look at how crime is viewed in each state. Let's see in which state do Black people largely have the ability to take the ability to protect themselves in their own hands. You know, I'm from Chicago, and I went to school in some of these communities. I have family in some of the communities there, and I I don't want to. Chicago is a beautiful place. I love it. It's my hometown. I got family there, but I just don't feel like my grandfather or my uncle or my cousin should have to fear for their life to go to work. To go to work, you know. It's just something. It's just something to think about. And if you see, even talking about this, like I never said what I agree with, who was right, who was wrong, who got policies that's effective, who don't. I want you to draw your own policies in your head, and you draw your inclusion on conclusions of what's working, what's not working. You know.
Yeah, I wonder if there's you're talking about the media representations too, and that's something that would be interesting to see or research or to look into, like in relation to your work too, like media depictions or just depictions in general of African American gun owners. Like, are they largely invisible in Texas, whereas in Chicago they're visible but depicted in a specific and specifically negative light? I think that would be kind of interesting to look
I
at.
think it'd be super interesting. I think that's exactly what my work is about. And I think largely that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the visual archive of this research, because I haven't seen a lot of research like this. But I think through photography, it can almost be like the visual archive of work like this.
All right. I think that's a good note to end on, the visual archive.
Yep, yep.
If anybody has any last minute questions, and if not, I want to thank you, Christian, for taking time to do this. We will eventually archive it on our Vimeo page, so we'll let you know, and people can share that with anyone else who might not have been able to make it tonight.
Yeah. And hey, thanks for having me. And I think it was beautiful chatting with you guys tonight.
All right. Thanks, Christian.
Okay, have a good one.
All right. Night.